Hi everyone, Simon from Zest here, and today I'll show you how we make espresso. So first of all, what is espresso? Espresso is a strong, small volume, highly concentrated coffee beverage. And while it's not very popular in Australia to drink it as such, it is the base for every single beverage that we have in the menu in cafes. Making espresso is simple. Just like any coffee beverage, it's all about mixing coffee grounds together with some water. Now, the difference between espresso and let's say another coffee beverage like filter coffee is that we use an espresso machine to push the water through the coffee bed. We're using the mechanical pressure of that coffee machine in order to extract more out of the coffee. This allows us to grind coffee finer and therefore have this stronger, more concentrated beverage. In order for anyone using our coffee to get the most out of it and to experience it consistently the same way we do, we use coffee recipes. A coffee recipe works exactly the same way as a cooking recipe, and it generally includes the ingredients that we need for the recipe and the quantity of these ingredients, the methodology, all the different steps that we need to take to make this specific recipe, and the tools that we need, and finally all of the cooking and baking parameters. So for example, the temperature and the time for which we're going to cook our food, for example. Alright, so let me show you the whole process of making espresso. So first, I'm going to remove the handle from the machine and I'm going to give it a quick purge. I'm going to wipe the inside of my basket to make sure it's nice and dry, make sure there's no coffee inside, and I'm going to start grinding by inserting the handle into the grinder. So this grinder is a ground by weight grinder, which means that it has a scale built in and it will grind exactly the amount of coffee that I want. So I pre-programmed this grinder to give me 22 grams of coffee, which is exactly what I did. And that means that I don't need to check and weight my portafilter to make sure that it's exactly 22 grams because the grinder is doing it. So not every grinder does that. And if you're not using a ground by weight grinder, then you would need to check how much coffee is inside your basket because you'll see some fluctuations. So now, as you see me do that, I'm tapping the side of the handle in order to make sure that the coffee grinds are evenly distributed around my basket. This will mean that when I temp, when we pressurize and when we level the coffee, we have a more even density. So before temping, I'm gonna put it not on the spout, but on this flat surface right here, and I'm gonna give it a little knock on the bench. I'm gonna level the coffee, I'm gonna collapse, and as you can see, the coffee's gone down and it's now filling the bottom part of the basket. This means that now again we have an even better density of coffee all around. So just a couple of times. And again, not on the spouts because you can break them and also can catch some of the coffee grinds that are on your mat and that will end up in your customers' drinks. Now, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna temp. So temping is about removing the air pockets that are inside of our baskets. So by removing the air pockets, we will pressurize the coffee that is inside the basket, and this will allow us to have a more even flow, and it will allow the water to flow more evenly, and again to get more consistent espressos. So what I'm doing is I'm holding the base of the temper with my thumb and index like this, placing my hand like that, elbow up, and I'm pressing with my wrist straight in order to avoid injuries. So the pressure comes from my shoulder, not from my wrist. I just press down once, remove it, and I have perfectly flat and tamped coffee. And you can see that it's pressurized because when I do this, it is not falling, okay? So we've removed all of the air pockets, and that means that the water won't be channeling when it travels the espresso. So now that our coffee bed and our coffee puck is ready, it's time to insert it into the machine. So that part is quite critical because we want to make sure that when we insert the handle, it is done very gently, okay? Effortlessly. Very often, we'll see baristas insert the handle and sort of like knock it and create all these cracks and channel. And this is particularly bad because it means that our coffee bed is no longer pressurized. And that means that, see, it would be falling if we were sort of flipping the handle. And the issue with that is it has some cracks inside, and that means that the water will flow through those cracks without traveling through the coffee evenly, and that's called channeling. It doesn't extract the coffee. So avoid inserting the handle in a very rough way, just be very gentle. So I've got another shot ready, so it won't channel this time. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm going to insert the handle and I'm gonna press the button that was programmed to give me the right amount of water to get that 38 gram yield that we want. So again, 22 grams of coffee, and I want to get 38 grams of espresso. So I gently insert the handle, make sure it's stacked nice and tight, press that button, and I've got a few seconds before I can put the cup. So basically between 5 and 8 seconds before you see the first drop, and then the espresso will be pouring. And I don't need to worry about stopping the machine because most machines are equipped with volumetric, which means that they will stop pouring water as soon as we've reached the amount of volume, the amount of liquid that it was programmed to dispense. So here I've got my 38 grams of espresso, but it poured in 21 seconds, not the 30 to 34 seconds that we're aiming for. So we're gonna need to fix that. So here we got the dose right, we got the right amount of yield, the right amount of espresso in the cup, but it was pouring too fast, 21 seconds, and we're aiming for 30 to 34. So we need to fix that. The way we're gonna fix it is not by changing anything onto the machine, as most people believe. The way we're gonna fix it is, again, we wanna slow down our extraction time. We want to have a longer extraction. In order to do that, we need to create more resistance inside of our basket. Because the way the machine works is that it will dispense the set amount of water it was programmed to dispense, but it will take longer if there's more resistance. For example, if I remove this handle and I just press that button, it will no longer take 21 seconds, but it'll take roughly around 7 to 10 seconds to dispense all of that water because there's no resistance. See, 9 seconds. But as soon as I start inserting some coffee, there's more resistance and therefore it takes longer. Now, in order to create even more resistance for it to go to all the way to 30 to 34 seconds, I'm gonna need to make changes to the grinder, not to the coffee machine. So in order to make more resistance, to create more resistance out of the basket, I'm gonna grind finer. So I'll make this adjustment right now. So I'm gonna move this part to a finer grind setting. So right now we see we're at 3.5. If I move towards the 0, I'm gonna go finer. And if I move towards the 8, I'm gonna go coarser. So I'm just gonna move it a couple notches down to 2.9 or 3. And I'm gonna run some shots just to see if that change was enough or if it wasn't too much. And there's no real way to tell if that was sufficient. We're just gonna have to run some coffee and see how the adjustment was. But generally speaking, we recommend making small changes and see how the coffee is running. Cool, so you gotta remember that when you're making changes to your grind setting, you won't necessarily see that change come into effect just yet. What happens is that most grinders have a chamber that holds onto ground coffee. So if I make a change to my grind setting like I just did now, there's still coffee stuck onto that chamber, and that coffee is still in the previous grind setting. So when I make changes, like bigger changes to my grind setting, what I need to do is grind some coffee and throw it away in order to purge, because that coffee is ground on the previous setting. So now that we've done some purging, the next coffee that I'll grind should be on a finer setting. So now we've gone finer, we've created more resistance inside of our basket, and we still have that 38 gram of espresso yield, but it's now pouring in 30 seconds. So again, for you to remember, if we want a longer extraction time, so if we want to slow down the extraction, we need to go finer. And if we want to have a faster extraction time, so if we want the coffee to be running faster, we need to use a coarser grind setting. And an easy way for you guys to think about it is the following. Think of coffee grinds being either little rocks or sand. So sand would be a fine grind setting. And if you think that this is a bucket filled with sand, it means that the water would struggle to flow through the coffee because sand particles are quite small, they're very tight, very close to each other, and it will be very difficult for the water to find a pathway to come out from the bottom. If these were bigger rocks, like pellets for example, it would be much easier for the water to find some space and gaps in between the rocks, and therefore it would flow faster. So a coarse grind setting is like these big rocks, and a fine grind setting is like sand. Coarse means fast and fine means slow. And that's how we make espresso at Zest. See, it's not very complicated, it's just about mixing coffee and water together and following these steps. It might take a couple of tries for you to practice this and to nail it, but it's all about practice and again, enjoying the whole process.